going to be talking about water here and its relevance to astrology. So I think you're going to find this fascinating. So Thomas was the director and editor of the Borderlands Sciences Research Foundation through the 80s and 90s. His publishing work spanned Tesla, Victor Schauberger, the Lakhovsky multiple wave oscillator, electrotherapeutics, light and color, radionics, etheric physics, and the subtle forces animating matter. Wonderful stuff. Work that seeded a global underground of researchers who sensed rightly that nature had been badly misread. He breathed life into those ideas, asking always, what if the suppressed conversation between consciousness, water, and living energies is the one conversation that really matters? I just love that. That question has never left him. He continues to research and write at the intersection of sacred geometry, living water, ether physics, anthroposophical science, and plasma research, all in service of a single animating vision that the universe is not a machine to be engineered, but a living conversation to be rejoined. Wow, that's pretty inspiring. So welcome, Thomas. And I'm thrilled to get into this discussion because for all the viewers listening, Thomas has recently produced an incredible 4-hour film where he really talks about water as a fractal antenna. Water as a fractal antenna that operates, it's responsive across many frequency scales all at once. And so this is going to be fascinating. So I'd quite like to start there, really, Thomas, about water as a fractal antenna before we get into the charts.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, no, thank you, Pam. I really appreciate being on. And yeah, I love good conversations, and I know you're up for one. Basically, water, when I say sacred geometry, it's sort of sacred in the sense that it supports life. And in that sense, water is like a living organism, it connects us to the universe. Because how do people think of the universe? The standard sort of view is that we're on a chunk of rock flinging around a nuclear furnace, and it's just a thin film of life that just by chance everything happened the way it is. And, we're just so lucky that we evolved to this stage. But there's another approach to that. And we take, what we call the Goethean, from the German poet philosopher Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, we take a cognitive transformation of consciousness in that, where the observer is a participant in the universe. So we're not just looking on and weighing and measuring things, but we're part of it. And part of that is the consciousness and the knowledge. So what we develop, and what I hope your listeners will develop from this, is what we call a new organ of cognition. So basically, your worldview is your organ of cognition. You think that way, it becomes your identity, but it can evolve. And as you learn new ideas that actually make sense, the mind doesn't shrink back to a smaller size. It remains at that size. So basically, what I'd like to do is just space itself. So people think 3D. It's very common. I do it myself. But when you think about space itself, you wave your arms around. There's only one dimension, and that's space. The three dimensions we impose by our experience of it. And Rudolf Steiner said that was one of the grave errors of humanity's descent beneath matter, as he called the age of materialism, that this 3D inner sense of us, we've got the front, back, up, down, left, right, that was removed as a lifeless coordinate system in space. So it is a coordinate system, and we can do it, but space doesn't work that way. And as Eric Dollard, the great Tesla researcher, taught me like 40 years ago, he's saying, yes, he goes, look at a cylinder. You only need 2 dimensions, the radius and the length. He said, so if people think about that, they'll realize. So what's the alternative is what we call projective geometry. And the reason I want to bring this in is because this is going to tie us in with all the different ideas. It takes a second to get your head around it. So in projective geometry, there's 2 polarities. You have point and plane. So, you have a single point, just like the point centered of a Cartesian coordinate system. And then the plane is like the infinite plane. people conceive what's the universe like. They got the James Webb trying to look as far as they can see, and what's out there. Nobody really knows. It's kind of an imaginary thing, but it's part of our consciousness. And in projective geometry, the infinite plane is the source of the life energies or the etheric energies. So where things radiate from a point, they, like gravity, it's pulling us in from the center of the planet, but the life forces are coming from outside. So a good way to understand this is a plant. The seed is the point, right? And it grows. And then out of it, these leaves come out. And it's like, humans, like when we're born, we're ensouled with all these different organs. And as in some aspects of astrology, the different organs relate to the different planets. And then, the different parts of the outer body relate to the zodiac. So we're wired in from that sense. But the plant only has one organ. It's the plant. It metamorphoses through these, because out of the seed, what pops out is this thing, and then the stem comes up and leaves come out, and the leaves are planar, right? They're picking up from the infinite plane. They're picking up these forces coming in, and that's why they're reaching out. And it's the levity force that's coming up. So that gets us to water. So water, people think H2O, hydrogen and oxygen, and we call it hydration. But Rudolf Hauschka, and people have heard like Dr. Hauschka's, cosmetics and skin creams. He was a brilliant pharmacist, chemist. And what he called hydrogen and oxygen, he called them pyrogen and biogen. He said hydrogen was misnamed because that's not water. If we look at water, you look out at a lake or an ocean, that's basically oxygen you're looking at. It's 89% oxygen and only 11% hydrogen, which helps make the mobility of it. So that misnaming in itself has given us the wrong sort of concept. And Ernst Lehrs, who was a senior science teacher at the original Waldorf school under Steiner, he said that basically hydrogen is levity from the plane pole of projective geometry, and and oxygen is gravity. And we think of hydrogen, it's the lightest element, it goes up. Oxygen is the oxidizer, and it pulls down. But the two of them together is this, basically the tension of the two planes. And that's what gives it life. It gives it all these anomalous properties, which actually, allow it to sustain life. I'm talking a little fast. I'm kind of excited. I just appreciate being on here. And there's so many ideas. I want to basically lay them out sort of in sets. So I'm going to get to fractals in a second. So the next step is like Plato, right? We have the Platonic solids, the cube, the tetrahedron, the icosahedron. Well, basically, the first three, the cube, the octahedron, and the tetrahedron, they tessellate space. You can fit them together. We could say that's like the point pole of projective geometry, whereas the icosahedron and the dodecahedron, those are like the plane pole because they don't tessellate space. There's always space. And Plato said that the icosahedron is water. And Professor Martin Chaplin from the University of South Bank, London, who's done extensive decades of research on water structure, he basically shows that water does take icosahedral structures. That is, so Plato was actually correct in that. So what that is, and I've actually, it might be good if I go to my slides because I can actually illustrate this. So maybe, should I share
that would be
screen?
great. Let me just make sure that, you should, let me just, that should work now. You should be able to share now, Thomas.
Yes, it's giving me the opportunity, screen 2, and I will start the PowerPoint here. Okay. Do you see that?
Not yet.
Okay. Oh, sorry, I didn't push the last button.
Yeah, there we go. Wonderful.
Okay. Okay, great. So I went one slide too far. Let me go back, trying to push here. Okay, so you spoke of Vida Austin's work. I think she's one of the most amazing researchers in the modern world here. outside of academia, because what she's showing is our consciousness is integral with water. And I know your listeners are very familiar with her work on, pictures in water. But the way I'm looking at it is, basically field conditions. So water picks up everything because it is a fractal antenna. So here's what she shows, spring water. Let me get my laser pointer on. You can see the beautiful pattern, freezing in rain and spring water. Rainwater gives us an interesting picture. Filtered water again, and tap water, very jumbled. And we can basically see, field conditions. This is ordered, then it goes down to less order. So we know that water itself has inherent properties within itself for structure. And here's Martin Chaplin's. I just wanted to show this so you get the idea of the fractal antenna. So water, it basically forms into what they call a pentamer. 5 water molecules come together. And from there, it forms a dodecahedral core. And around that, you get this icosahedral cluster. This is what Plato said was the water element. And this all comes from X-ray and neutron diffraction readings of water. So this isn't mysticism or anything. This is peer-reviewed science out of the university. And then they form super icosahedron. And these all overlap, right? And it's not like the molecules are clumped together. What actually happens is that these are like energetic patterns, almost like waves that move through. So, I've spoken with like chemical engineers, senior engineers at companies. They say, well, water can't be structured. The hydrogen bonds move in trillions of a second, and that's true, they do. But there's higher order forms electromagnetically, what we call coherent domains. This is what my workshop is. We go into detail on that. We don't need to go here. I'm just showing why this is, because this is all based on phi. This is all golden ratio, and it comes from the plane pole, the etheric side of projective geometry or space. So in saying that, we'll go to these pictures by Vita Austin. And probably about 7 years ago now, I gave her one of these antennas that I've worked with for many years, based on my research into the Lukovsky multiple wave oscillator. We particularly call this one the BioArc disk. And basically, we can see Vita crystallized tap water. So this would be New Zealand tap water. And if you remember from the earlier slide of the field conditions, very similar. And then after water sitting for 1 minute on the BioArc antenna, she crystallized it, and we get this picture, which looks like pure spring water. So what's interesting about this is that
pure geometry is doing this, Thomas. Yes?
Exactly, because the water is acting like a fractal antenna, and it has the phi-natured structure in the water, and this antenna is basically phi ratioed. So everything is based on the life energy. So this is, I couldn't believe it. I mean, we knew, because we used these things for years and doing kinesiology, and we've even, done like heart rate variability tests on EMFs. But I never knew exactly why they worked. And when Veda sent me this, and I realized the reason these antennas work and structure, give, we can say wellness benefits to the body, is because of the geometry is acting on the water in our body, because we're 99.9% water in molecular count, because like each DNA molecule has like 80 billion water molecules around it. We see these pictures of the DNA with this spiral sort of thing, but it's completely integral with billions of water molecules, and water molecules shape it and form it. And depending on the energetic state of your consciousness in your body and the fields around you is how well like proteins are formed in your body. This ties into health directly. So here's
now, after 1 minute,
crystal arc.
That was 1 minute, wasn't it, Thomas?
1 minute.
Pure geometry, 1 minute. It's phenomenal.
I would have thought it'd take a half hour or something. It just blew me away, that research. So here's another experiment that Vita did. Before and after direct exposure to Wi-Fi routers. So here's spring water again. Spring water after 1 minute exposure to Wi-Fi. Right, looks like the tap water again, right? Totally disrupted. Here's spring water after 1 minute exposure to Wi-Fi while sitting on top of the BioArc disk. And you can see the patterns come in. And one thing I found interesting is because it looks like ferns.
Yeah.
And of course, the log periodic antenna, which is basically what the BioArc disk or the golden ratio MWO antennas is basically the same, sort of fractal geometry of ferns. So it's quite interesting that pattern came in.
I also understand, Thomas, that ferns are incredibly ancient. Can you confirm that? They're extremely ancient as a plant life.
Oh, absolutely. I lived in New Zealand for a couple of decades, and they got those fern trees down there, and they go back to the Paleozoic era.
Yeah.
They are very ancient. So there's no doubt about that. And primal. Basically, all life has these properties at different levels. It's quite an interesting study. But just to show what water does, the connection of water to the universe. So now from Vita's pictures, we saw the relationship of geometry to water. And in here, this is Theodore Schwenk, and I know you like his work, Pam.
I got very excited about this. I got super excited about the wheat grain. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically what he did is he took purified water. They doubled purified water, right? They wanted to make sure it was very pure. And they basically put it in glass vials, identical glass vials, filled up 2/3 of the way with water. And they would have like 6 of them a day. And what they would do is every 2 hours, they would shake them for like 4 minutes, like homeopathic succussion. And then they would use them to germinate wheat seeds. And they would use biodynamic seeds, of course, to make sure they got good germination. So we can see on this chart, the top chart, this is one day. This is the 24th of June, 1953. And so they would have done at 8 o'clock, at 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and 6 o'clock. What he's showing here is this is St. John's Day, 24th of June, 53, and St. John's Day, 24th of June, 1954, a year later. And the pattern's almost identical on the same day a year later. And down below to show the variation, there's a lot more in the book. I'm just trying to show a couple to give representative. People can easily find this work on the internet, to pursue it further. And I cover it more in depth in my workshop. So here's basically the 31st of August that same year. And we can see there's sort of some general similar patterns, but quite different as well. And then here's the 16th of September. You're not getting the same thing. So to get 2 identical days on the exact same day was very, very significant. And this table here, basically what he did is there was an eclipse this day. And right here, as we see the eclipse, basically happened between like 12:30 and 3. I actually looked it up to see what the times were. And so he's marked them accurately for that. And just before the eclipse, there was this big drop in the germination rates, which is interesting because there's actually modern experiments on radioactive decay rates and solar cycles. Basically, depending on how far the sun is through its orbit, radioactive decay rates vary, right? This stuff's not as steady as modern science would like everybody to believe in the paradigm. And also, when flares, what they found is just before the flare goes off, they get this basically big change in the activity, just like this. So what they're measuring in modern radioactive measurements against solar activity is what Schwenk found in wheat germination in the 50s. So there's connections through all of these at different levels of science. And as he said, other eclipses produced corresponding results. But I think part of the reason...
Yeah, sorry, just to explain this fully, Thomas, what was happening was a minimum wheat growth during the time of the eclipse. Yes, when the sun's light and power was blocked, that's when you saw the big dip. But it was actually, right. He was already getting a dip, wasn't he, before the eclipse was fully, totally visible? Because I think it was a total solar eclipse, wasn't it? June 30th.
Yes. I don't know exactly where that was on the planet because some of these experiments show it didn't matter where on the planet they were, they still got the effects.
Wow.
It was still quite interesting, right? Because what he was doing, they would grow the wheat until it got to about 10 centimeters, and then they would basically measure them, and that's where they got the average. That's what these graphs are, the average growth rates through the year. They did 7 years of these, from 1947 to 1954. So it's very dedicated work.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason too is, and what this shows, right, the meaning. What does this actually mean? Because when you're shaking the vial, basically you're creating little mini vortices inside of there, and there's many layers, many planes, right? And we're trying to deal with the planar energy coming in from the cosmic periphery of space. And that's what's interacting with the water. This gets into homeopathy, and I have a whole section on how homeopathy works on this basis in the workshop as well. But it all ties in. In fact,
sorry, Thomas,
go ahead.
Just before you leave that, essentially the potency of the water as a growth medium is reduced when the sun's light and power is blocked during the eclipse.
Exactly. Even though they're doing this inside, right? They're not actually doing it out in the sun. It's an ambient Earth condition.
Yeah.
So it's happening, just wherever they were at.
Wow.
So it's going to get even deeper on the next one. So this is something I've been into like 40 years here. I love this. Lily Kalisko's work. She was a significant associate of Rudolf Steiner. And Rudolf Steiner tasked her because in alchemy, right, we have this gold in the sun, silver in the moon, Mercury, as we know, copper, Venus, iron, Mars, tin, Jupiter, lead, Saturn. And Steiner tasked her with seeing if there was actually if there was a real connection. How could we measure the connection here? So
this came from ancient consciousness, didn't it? That the ancient peoples intuited these links with specific metals to specific planets. Yes.
Exactly. This goes back to like the Chaldeans and the Babylonians and stuff, right? It cuts through. It's only modern, chemistry, right? It's like alchemy, right? It's some crazy stuff that the guys are just trying to make gold. Thank God we have chemistry now. So basically what Lily Kalisko did is she would take the metallic salts, because as Steiner said, so long as substances are in a solid state, they're subject to the forces of the earth. But as soon as they enter the liquid state, planetary forces come into play. So what Lily would do, she would take like gold chloride, silver nitrate, and as metallic salts, mix them in water and put them in these little petri dishes, and then take blotter paper, and she used all high-end blotter paper, special German stuff. This is all back in the 20s when this picture was taken. And she did these experiments in the basement of the Goetheanum, to make sure that they weren't being interfered with any surface conditions. And so then they would let this rise up the blotter paper, and then it would get a picture. So what we see on the right here is a gold chromatogram in color. So this is the general crystallization pattern of gold chloride on a normal day. So this is the basis of her work, the metal planet crystallization work. So what we're going to look at two different solar eclipses in 1927 and 1936. And in the 27, she apologized because she couldn't afford to print color pictures, so she only printed the one color picture, which was a slide I showed earlier to give the general idea. So here's the day before the eclipse, June 27th, 1927, and we can see the general characteristics of the pattern. And I thought about colorizing these. I thought, no, I better just leave them like this because it gives the idea, and we'll see from the next ones why. So then she had here beginning of solar eclipse, June 29th, 1927. This is the next day, 5:19, and it actually was the eclipse. This wasn't a total over her. This one actually went over like the UK, Belgium, Scandinavia. So they just caught the edge of it, like over in Stuttgart where she was. But as she said, it didn't matter where on Earth. She found the same effects wherever the eclipse happened. But we can see the pattern's disrupted, and you get lines across. And then after, so this is 5:20 in the afternoon, because the eclipse ended by 7:15 in the morning, her local time there. So the pattern's starting to come back in the afternoon. It took, a day or so, it all came back.
So that's a metallic solution. Sorry, Thomas, that's a metallic solution of gold rising up the blotting paper and losing its pattern during the eclipse because gold is connected to the sun symbolism, essentially.
Exactly, right. The gold is the microcosm, the sun is the macrocosm, and when the moon is in front of the sun, the macrocosmic connection is cut off.
Yeah, amazing. And we lose the pattern. Amazing.
Exactly. And basically, and then here's the one of June 19th, 1936. So here's the day before that she got this pattern in the gold. And then during the eclipse, basically, you got this pattern. She got lines through it. And as she said, the darkening which the sun experiences, in the cosmos is the same as the darkening experienced by the gold. And then this is the next day in the morning, so like 24 hours. So this is 24 hours before and 24 hours after the eclipse, basically, during totality, this one happened. So we can see the effect that the eclipses have on gold.
Yeah, wow.
And that's interesting.
I love that idea of, the darkening of the sun and the darkening of the color on the blotting paper. I mean, it's just so literal, isn't it?
It is. And there's been modern researchers have done work on this. Nick Kollerstrom, he's got a couple books out. He's been doing this research in England for about the last 30 years or so. So there are other people that have pursued this with very similar results. So let's look at silver in the moon. This is very interesting. So basically silver nitrate put in a little petri dish and it rises up. And this is sort of the standard pattern they get. And no matter how much you can supersaturate the solution, and during the day it would still rise up to here. And then when the sun goes down, the secondary pattern rises up. And what's interesting is well, maybe it's because there's light. So she'd do it in the dark, and you get little tiny bits, but nothing like this. And you got to remember, she was doing this underground. She's doing it in the basement of the Goetheanum there in Germany.
That's phenomenal. That's amazing, isn't it? The difference when the moon has its potency.
Right. It doesn't matter what phase the moon is in. It's just that the moon rules the night and the sun rules the day.
Yeah.
There are cosmic principles because each planet, right? The moon's not just the moon that we see. As you know from astrology, there's the spheres of the planets. Like, go back, it's the ancient knowledge. We can think of, the physical planets like the shepherd for that force, moving it. You're shepherding the whole cosmic force of the planet.
Yeah.
But also, Kalisko also did experiments, and don't have all the slides, but she did this every day for like a year. And what she found is these feathery patterns were the strongest and most dramatic in spring. Through into summer, they started waning in autumn, and in winter they were, basically kind of flaccid and stuff. So it was like they were responding to the seasons as well, as though the life energy of the earth was also part of this. It wasn't just the moon, we could say, because these are elements on earth. Like Steiner said, when they're in their mineral form, they're bound to gravity. So there's still some gravity force in this. There's still that interaction because water is the tension between the levity and gravity. But what makes it interesting? So let's look here: gold chloride and silver nitrate. So they create a pattern like this, and what happens then during the eclipse, when the moon moves in front of the sun during the day? This is the same eclipse that we showed, the one with the color pictures. We get this pattern rises up, right? The moon force takes over and it's ruling the sky.
Wow.
As though it's nighttime.
In front of the sun. Yeah.
It's in front of the sun. So its power has taken over again.
That's amazing.
So this is very dramatic concepts once you really get your head around them. You're going, what? How does this stuff work, right? It doesn't work from like the molecular sort of concept.
And this is
this is what I was talking about.
And it's almost removing time, isn't it? Because it's almost this correlation is happening instantly. It appears. We're not having to wait hours and hours and hours to see a change because there is no time.
Exactly.
Yeah, there is
exactly, and this is why the Vedic sciences, they stay inside and meditate during eclipses. They don't go out and look at them, and this could be why, right? I mean, they are spectacles. I like seeing them myself, but I can understand the science behind why they would do that.
Yeah.
And I found this slide. I thought you would really appreciate this, and this is gold and tin. And what's interesting is gold and tin in ancient times, they actually made like a special sort of colored metal they called Cassius metal or something like that. And so Lilly worked with that, the gold chloride and tin chloride. So this is kind of a standard pattern that would make.
So Sun Jupiter we're looking at here.
Basically Sun Jupiter, very interesting. But what's interesting is okay, so here's a solar eclipse. This is the 1920s. This is the same one we saw with the silver, and the same one with the colored photographs of the gold. So it's the same eclipse. She was running all these experiments. So what happens is this is the gold. During the eclipse, the gold gets shoved totally to the bottom.
Wow.
Jupiter, because in Steiner's thesis, the Jupiter phase is our next phase of evolution in that sense. So, Jupiter does have this dominant energy in the sky. So, while all that stuff is happening, while the silver is taking over, the Jupiter is pushing the gold down. So there's all these complex actions are happening. And then here's later on in the day. So this is after the eclipse, and there's a lot more of these photos. I just try to pick some of the main ones, to give the highlights so people can get the meaning and the implication and what this means. So it starts coming back. So that's the 29th. And I have this little graph here. This is more, you can't really graph because images, it's not quantitative, but it's qualitative. But this kind of is a representative. So here's the day of the eclipse, right? When the moon went in front, the tin dominated, right? Jupiter dominated. It basically took until July 6th until it came back.
Wow.
What I wanted to show is there's this point here on July 1st. This here, Lilly, because she was just getting more or less blank pictures like this, so she mixed a 6-to-1 gold to tin ratio rather than 1-to-1 like all these are, and she started getting the picture to come back. But it wasn't until July 6th, a week later, that with the 1-to-1 ratio, she started getting the original pictures back. And what's interesting, and my thinking on this is well, because Jupiter is dominant, and it's like this future phase. In essence, this is 1 week, right? And a week is the 7 planets. So the sun basically had to go through and reconnect with each planet on its way back to meet Jupiter again in order to regain its full strength and full relationship with Jupiter and tin through this relationship. So this is showing complexity of action between the planets.
That's amazing. That's amazing. It's really exciting. It really is, because looking at this blotting paper, that is really a picture of what's happening in the cosmos. It's a representation of what's happening in the cosmos.
Exactly.
Very
and then here's lead and Saturn and Sun conjunction experiments. This is interesting because lead itself doesn't really create patterns much. It, Lilly worked with a lot of, different metallic mixtures trying to make them work. And what she found is that silver nitrate, iron sulfate, they made an interesting picture, but then when she put lead nitrate in, she got this real heaviness to it, like this. And you can see it. But what's interesting then is, I did a documentary on this actually 10 years ago. It's on my YouTube channel, just on the lead Saturn experiments. But what's interesting, and this was a major conjunction, a top conjunction, when Saturn actually went fully behind the sun. And when Saturn went behind the sun, the lead pattern disappeared from the crystallizations.
That's phenomenal, isn't it? So the sun is blocking the power of Saturn, and we lose all the lead picture essentially, all the lead
Exactly.
effect, on the blotting paper. That's phenomenal.
Right, and you have to think, right? We've got leads in our bones and stuff. All these metals are in our system.
Yeah.
We get gold in the heart. And one thing I should mention is Lily Kalisko. She gave a talk in 1964 at an anthroposophical medical conference called "Gold and the Signs of the Times." And what she found is during the 1950s, mid 1950s, these distorted patterns that she was getting in the gold during eclipses, she was starting to get them all the time. And the gist of the talk is she didn't know what was happening. She said, but something on the planet is affecting Earth's relationship,
Wow.
Gold's relationship with the sun. And I mean, I go electricity, right? That was like over the horizon radar. Yeah, because electricity is the fallen light ether. So, what we really need to do is reconnect with these planetary spheres. That's why I say, what's the practical reason of this? It's like, well, that's a good question. The practical thing is figuring out how we can reconnect with the cosmos, because the way we've developed our electricity, our society, we're disconnected from all these forces, but they're interpenetrating us all the time.
And look what Wi-Fi, and Thomas, look what Wi-Fi did to the water in one of your very early charts. It made the water very disordered. So that's demonstrating what you're talking about.
Exactly. But if this stuff doesn't show some sort of verification of astrology, I'm not sure what we can pull out.
I'm so excited. I can't tell you. I'm beside myself. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I want to point out here is that all these experiments are based on the fact that from a geocentric position, it's acting as though Earth is the center of this phenomena that's going on. And this is what Steiner called the anthropocentric world. The anthropocentric, we can call it alert space. So there's like alert space and inert space. And this is the difference between, it's even like point-centered and plane-centered, right? There's these different levels of polarities within it. But that's not the only one. The heliocentric one's there too. They're both there, and they're both very real. And Picardi's work is great because this shows a bit more on a relationship. And Picardi, he was the chair of the chemistry department at the University of Florence, basically in the 1950s. They call him the chemist of the sun. So basically, chemical reactions plotted against solar and geomagnetic activity. So here he is. I found some pictures of him. And basically, he was, without getting into the chemistry of it, you basically have a chemical solution, a colloidal solution where it's in suspension. You put water into it, and a chemical drops out, and you get hydrochloric acid and the sediment at the bottom. Is fundamentally what happens. So what they were doing is they were timing the precipitation rate of what was happening here. And he was doing 3 tests. Activated water, which was basically, they had like a vacuum bulb with mercury in, which lowers surface tension in water. They used it for descaling boilers on ships and stuff, and industrially. But it affected the water. So it was activated water in open air, activated water under copper, which is a Faraday screen, then normal water under copper. And all these were based against, so basically regular water, normal water versus these 3 tests. And what he was doing was measuring the difference between the precipitation rate in the normal water and the precipitation rate of these 3 stages of the test. So we'll look at basically the P test, which is basically normal water under the Faraday cage. And this is all basically data analysis. So this is basically 1956 to 58 here, and curves plotted superimposed epochs, 0 days, you see 0 days, 20 days with proton flares. So they're like M class or X class, big flares off the sun. So we piled 20 days up of data, and 4 days before and 4 days after. And this is basically how the solar activity would look for that phase. And then this is the reactions of the colloidal precipitation.
Wow.
I'm trying to
There's a
speak
direct.
in not too scientific terms. I'm trying to keep it simple here. So yeah, it's following the solar cycle exactly.
Wow. Direct correlation with the solar cycle, solar flares.
Direct correlation. And what we have down here is correlation between blood sedimentation and chemical test P. So basically, what's happening here is happening. They did both. They did blood sedimentation with like rabbit blood or chicken blood. You know, scientists, they can't help themselves. But we got the results. But they also did blood coagulation experiments. They did both, and how long it took to coagulate, and they followed the P test as well. So basically, what's happening here is happening inside your blood and in your system.
I love
totally
the words
integral.
you used, Thomas. You said what's happening in the beaker is happening in your blood.
Exactly.
Because it's when
there's no doubt about it.
Yeah, amazing.
There's a lot of scientific papers on this have come out since these days on space weather and different physiological and psychological states. During solar flares and geomagnetic activity, there's more heart attacks and things like that, more accidents. It just happens. You can chart it all out. People go, well, correlation doesn't mean this, and go, yeah, I don't know. We got like hundreds of years of this data now has been put together. The Soviets were doing a lot of research along these lines. Anyway, here's correlation between two different chemical tests, F and D, which is basically the activated water in open air and activated water under copper. And basically Wolf numbers, which is sunspot numbers, sunspot count. So we see these tests are following the sunspot activity perfectly.
Wow.
But what's interesting now is this graph here is showing 9 years. This is like the best 9 years of data that they accumulated. And this graph is basically showing the general rate through the year. But there was this big dip here, which is actually here because it's basically mirrored there. So the year goes from here to here. But this dip here is actually the March equinox, March 21st. And same dip every year. So what's happening on March 21st? So Picardi, he was trying to figure this out. What sort of field things are happening? What's Earth doing? So here's Earth, there's the sun. So here's the galactic plane. So he was building these mechanical things, trying to figure out, I guess they didn't have computers in those days. So they had to build these things. What's Earth's relationship to the galaxy, to the sun? What's happening? So what we can see is, here's a picture. So we're 100 astronomical units out from the solar system. And an astronomical unit is the distance between the sun and the Earth. So basically 100 times that distance from we are from the sun. You multiply it by 100, we're between the galactic center and Earth. So we're looking at the galactic center. And what's happening, so here's the solar system like this, and then here's the pop-out. So we can see the inner solar system. So the outer ring is Mars, the second ring is Earth. And what we see here is here's Earth right here on March 21st. This is the fastest Earth is going in orbit, and it's moving exactly directly at the galactic center. And that's this point right here.
Yeah.
It's like all the fields, whatever is causing that, it just shows that we're connected to the galactic center as well. So even though we have all this proof for sort of like all the geocentric activity, from Kalisko's work and other, cosmological botany and Schwenk and all of these, but we also have very good evidence, for the heliocentric and the galactic model as well. So we're wired in at all these different levels of activity.
Wow, and I'd love to quote your own words back at you, Thomas, because he saw this anomaly every single year on March 21st for 9 years, didn't he? And
yes, he did.
Your words were, Picardi's tests of precipitation rates in a lab in Florence were indexed to the geometry of the Earth's motion through the Milky Way. I mean, phenomenal. And this was university level research, wasn't it?
Exactly.
Wow.
I don't know. He came under a lot of criticism, because that was at the time to step out of the box. But yeah, he got a lot of criticism. But some of the tests, like I found a Japanese paper from 19 59, I think, somewhere around there, these Japanese scientists that were reproducing the blood sedimentation tests, with along with the P test. But I want to say he wasn't just doing these in Florence. There were scientists, they were doing these in Russia. And during the geophysical year, what was it, 57 to 58, they actually did a year of the experiments on Kerguelen Island in the Indian Ocean off Antarctica. So all the data from all these tests are included in this, right? It's all data analysis. So it wasn't just one guy doing this stuff. These were a number of labs coordinating their data.
And I'd love to also quote back your own words on Picardi's conclusion, which is, water is in continuous structured dialogue with the electromagnetic field conditions of the cosmos. Water is the medium for that dialogue. Your words.
It's exactly true. And this is why it's a fractal antenna, right?
Yeah.
Picardi, he didn't know about Martin Chaplin's work and the icosahedral models. This is all still in development. I've just been having a lot of fun going through it. But let's go a little bit further. Let's go cosmological botany. I wanted to throw a bit of this in here. I know we've probably eaten up most of the time, but I thought this one at least would be good. Planet correspondence. And this is based on Lawrence Edwards' work. He was in England, no, actually Scotland. He was a Scottish geometrician and botanist. So he was measuring tree buds, basically winter tree buds, because buds last through winter. And he'd go out there every day measuring these things and even develop some sort of electronic scanner towards the end of his research. So tree buds change form rhythmically. The rhythms are those of the alignments of the moon with bodies of the solar system. So a specific tree or flower changes the shape of its bud and the rhythm of the lunar alignment with a specific planet. Oak with Mars, beech with Saturn, birch with Venus.
Wow.
So this shows from first mathematical principles, successful description of biological form. So this means DNA cannot alone be the propagator of living form, and random processes aren't driving evolution, right? We're being woven from outside by all these forces. So what this little animation shows here is what he did. He had this thing called lambda, and without getting too mathematical, because some of this geometry is even a bit above my head, but I get the idea of what they're doing. And lambda is basically, he's taking the logarithm of two measurements of the spirals that are making, each of these different bud shapes. And that way he can measure it through the month and see. And basically during what he called alignment, which was either opposition or conjunction, was when the buds were the most elliptical shape. And basically at quadrature or square, as you would call it in astrology, was the most sort of more egg-shaped. But what this actually, so neither one's like perfect or anything. What it is basically all the buds are oscillating as the moon's moving through the zodiac with these planets. And what's interesting is, looked up the traditional, because Steiner was the one that said oak with Mars. So I looked up in Culpeper, so basically oak and Mars, from Edwards, Moon Mars, geocentric alignments, bud geometry, pulsates, 14-day Mars rhythm. But Culpeper, not assigned by Culpeper, but Steiner said it. But what's interesting is Edwards even said that he felt that some trees and flowers actually seem to relate at different times to different planets. But what I found interesting here is beech and Saturn. Culpeper, 1652, right? Saturn, was attributed by Culpeper, and birch and Venus as well. So these are classic attributions that, from, hundreds of years earlier, but the buds are measured oscillating with those planets and the moon.
Wow.
So there's this vast field of this research. And he was also doing egg shapes and, the perfect egg shape and water vortices. This is from his book, The Vortex of Life. So that's more or less it. I mean, it's about 10 minutes left. We can chat. I could throw one quick slide in I put at the end. I thought if I could slide this in, I was going to do it because I knew people would love it. Cosmological botany. This is another. We could even do another talk on this sometime if you want. But here is Mercury-Sun synodical pattern. Basically is sort of three major, three minor synods. and then we have Venus, which basically makes the rose of Venus, the 5. So basically, in cosmological botany, the monocots are, we can see here is the 3 petals and the 3 sepals, just like this. And the dicots basically are Venus. So all of these, and it's not like these planets are forming these, it's they're both drawn from the same cosmic archetypes. And that's why I say it can't be random. So anyway, I think I'm done sharing with that. We can.
So if you want to stop sharing that, yes, great, Thomas. I mean, this is to everyone listening out there. I find this immensely exciting, but this is just a tiny part of Thomas's research, and the 4-hour film he's put together is really mind blowing in terms of demonstrating that water is a fractal antennae. So, do you feel, with all of this work you've done over the last 4 decades, Thomas, all of this research, that water is providing the explanation of how astrology works?
I've come to that conclusion, yes. I would have to say Veda's research gave me the key overall, with the water research, but, I knew what Lily Kalisko's work was doing, and then looking at Schwenk. So absolutely, because we are water. Basically, matter is not the identity. Our identity is our form, and our form is water. And that's what as I get into, because there was a part in the workshop where I get into Rick Merrick's work, interference theory, where he shows how, like, the icosahedral water molecule and the dodecahedral carbon molecule actually form the egg shapes and a lot of our biological forms. So we're integral to it. So absolutely, water is the key. So drink a glass. As I say, it's interesting. I explain to people, water's not H2O. You have a glass of water, it's a single molecule. It's like this quasi-crystalline molecule. And you can put your intention into it. People have done this, Emoto did it, Vita did it, anybody can do it. You can, like, if you focus, life on it and put on plants, or try to get angry at the water and put on plants, the plants react exactly to it.
Yeah,
so there's no doubt water is the key.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I only think good thoughts about my water.
Yeah, bless your water.
I don't need to do the experiment.
Send it love, because then you're drinking love and you're urinating love out to the collective, which is just amazing. And I think in your film as well, just to remind people listening to this, that Veda and I did a sort of project together for a couple of years where she was using crystallography on water at the time of each of the lunations. Twice a month, new moon, full moon, or the eclipses, and she produced stunningly consistent results. And so I might actually include, as a reminder, the presentation that Veda had.
Absolutely.
At the end of that project, because it's so clear, it's so consistent, it's just non-debatable, the effect of the new moons, full moons and eclipses on the water that was then crystallized. So it's well worth, if you haven't seen that, taking a look at that as well. But this is brilliant pioneering work, Thomas, and I really want to congratulate you. I mean, you're taking the work of previous geniuses, but you equally are doing genius work in synthesizing it and summarizing it and bringing it all together to give us the conclusions that you are just in this snippet of your 4-hour film today, because it's really giving us a whole different view of the cosmos, that everything is connected, that water is the connector, the unifier, as Veda says, of all things. And just recognizing that water is such an active consciousness in who we are, the entire cosmos surrounding us. We are just flowing with it, and it's giving us one of the only explanations I've ever heard, clear explanations of astrology. Because up to then, I was really thinking of the work of David Bohm and the parallel to Plato, that there's an implicate order and an explicate order, right. But this is really nailing it physically with all the experiments. So I really want to honor you and really thank you for your incredibly conscientious and diligent work with this.
Thank you. Well, I think really what the core of this is, my approach is what we call the phenomenological. There's really no abstraction here. Because we can think, and that's why I tell people, you want to argue. I've known people that are geocentrists, hardcore geocentrists, and they think, but look at all this research, shows that everything. I go, no, that's true, it is. But then we have the other research that shows the heliocentric side of it. But what do we perceive? With the sun rising in the east, setting in the west, this is what Steiner tried to get at. This is what the anthropocentric universe is we are in the center. And Steiner said in his astronomy course, which he said not to call an astronomy course, he said, it's a course on the relationship of the natural sciences to astronomy. He gets into, he says, in order to understand astronomy, you have to understand its polarity, right? You have the heavens up here, and the polarity of that is human gestation in the womb. That's the other polarity to the universe. And I think there's another good core. There's your seed for astrology coming out. So it's what do you experience? That's the Goethean approach. Raise your consciousness. Be a participant in what you observe.
Yeah.
This is what I promote, and this is what I write about in my articles as well, like seeing the whole of the plant. We look at the plant, just as it metamorphoses through its different stages, but then we can follow that through up to its great idea, which is the planetary system. And all of a sudden you've connected your consciousness to, the universe in that sense. And it is an elevated state of consciousness. You don't need drugs for that stuff. You just have to meditate and think about things that you experience.
And bless your water. So, yeah, absolutely.
And bless you, absolutely.
Amazing, wonderful work, Thomas. So I just really want to thank you for all that you've done and sharing the slides with us today, because they've been really very significant, I think, in helping people really understand astrology better and water better and the whole nature of reality. So thank you. Thank you. And I hope the listeners have enjoyed it as much as I have. And I think Thomas has enjoyed going through those too. So, God bless. And please share this with people if you found it really elevating for you, because, in the times we are in, getting a better understanding of the nature of our reality and our relationship to the cosmos